Hi, everyone. Hoping that you all are doing well today. Thank you for joining us. For a while, there has been a plan to do what are known to me as minis. These are sort of like shorts, but they are not shorts. They are more akin to what used to take place on YouTube before there was the expansion beyond the 10 minutes. Some of you might not be aware of the fact that previously YouTube videos were only 10 minutes in length, and so there was a cutoff there. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to have a series of discussions that are minis for many reasons. For one reason, this will help to share information, data more readily without the long, extensive analysis. Part of the reason for this is that with the long, extensive analysis, oftentimes the research starts off going in one direction and then it grows and grows and grows. And then the discussion becomes more complicated and more complex in so many different ways. And there are so many different branches to the conversation. And so it's often difficult to actually cover all of the things that need to be covered because things have been made more broad and more deep. And so, what we're going to do are these very cursory examinations of some things that will leave for you the opportunity to do a little bit more research on your own or analysis. And so, it will be the presentation of facts in many ways, with you doing some of the lifting in terms of the cognitive processing related to the implications for the information. So, we're going to start this discussion looking at the Pawnee Indians. The Pawnee are understood as Mandan Indian people. And so this is supposed to be a North American Indian collective. And so they are of the Mandan collective. Now, of course, many of you should be asking right now, whatever happened to all of these people that look like this? Good question. Very good question. And so, with respect to the Pawnee, we have the Mandan, spelled Mandan. As you know from looking at the Jat Gatras, this word, Mandan, Mandi, Mandian, all of these are somehow tied together. One thing to note is that when you're talking about different American Indian collectives, oftentimes the names that are given to the collectives are names that are superimposed. And so these are names that are imposed externally. They are given to the collectives. And so, therefore, it makes it very complicated sometimes to really understand who the people are. And there's this weird running narrative with these names that the American Indian collectives purportedly called themselves. And you will see it time and time again where there will be this offer that the name that the American Indian nation referred to itself as was it meant people, real people, authentic people, original people. It's it's highly unlikely that people were giving themselves those types of names for the collectives. I'll let you figure out why that doesn't really make complete sense. But at any rate, so we have the manned people, Mandan people, and the Pawnee. Now, we're not going to have a deep discussion about the Pawnee. We're going to be looking at an excerpt from this particular text called Crania Americana. And this is an entity who was studying the skulls of various Aboriginal nations. Now, people can think whatever they want to think about the studying of skulls, the studying of anatomy, the studying of physiology, but quite a bit of this studying of skulls is rooted in racist paradigms or beliefs in these different human races. And so you had certain people who wanted to examine the bodies of various groups of people to do these comparisons and contrast, all of this weird stuff. And you only have certain individuals that would really get into this. And so, of course, this particular person who wrote this is one of those entities. And so this entity is looking at the skulls of various Aboriginal nations, objectifying people essentially in North and South America. It's really interesting how collectives of people don't want to be around diverse groups of people, but they take their little selves from their homogenous homes and then move to a place where people are different and then complain about being surrounded by difference and complain about why they have to suffer the difference. In law, this is called sort of coming to the nuisance. And so when you come to what you think is a nuisance, that's your problem, because no one forced you to go to the nuisance. Okay? And so if diversity is a nuisance, then there are places where there is less diversity. And so if people need to be around people that are like them, it's actually possible for people to look around the world and find people that look just like them and take their little selves right on over to the people that look just like them, whether we're talking about Europe, Africa, Asia, or anywhere else. There's no reason to suffer being surrounded by other people or objectifying other people. It's very simple. Instead of people, again, traipsing around the world to go to different places, just stay where you are. And if you are in a place where the difference is bothering you, go to where you are the norm. Continuing on here. This particular piece is an essay on the varieties of the human species, and this is written by Samuel George Morton, MD, a former professor of anatomy in the medical department of Pennsylvania College at Philadelphia. And so you see the person's interest in terms of their membership and this presentation. Member of the Academy of Natural Sciences of Philadelphia, of the American Philosophical Society, of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, of the Boston Society of Natural History. And so this person isn't completely concerned with the healing arts. This person is concerned with some other things. This person makes some observations about the Pawnees along with the examination of the skull. Okay, and so it indicates here the Pawnees consist of two nations, the Pawnees proper and the Rakaras or the Arikaras. Now these are both interesting words, and they have a flair that suggests a European origin. Okay, it indicates here which the last are also called the Black Pawnees. The former inhabit the country on the River Platte, and the Rakara villages are below the Mandans on the Missouri. These tribes speak a language different from any other on this continent. Sit with that for a second. These tribes, these Mandans, speak a language different from any other on this continent. So we've got one anomaly. It goes on to indicate they do not differ much in their physical character and belligerent habits from the surrounding nations, but they have until lately practiced the singular custom of sacrificing human victims to Venus, the great star. Okay, so we've got a few anomalies going on here. So it's indicating they have a language difference. Physically, they look about the same as the rest of the indigenous people that they've seen. And so we see depictions of them. So they look like the surrounding nations. But they do something a little different. They practice human sacrifice. And they are sacrificing, according to this entity, to Venus, the great star. Okay. So there's a little bit of diversity going on right there with respect to these Mandans and the rest of the indigenous people around them and on the entire continent, according to this individual. And so they are standing out in the middle of the continent around the Missouri. It goes on to indicate the ceremony was performed annually. What collectives do you know of that we've talked about that have had something historically known as the annual custom? The annual custom that involved human sacrifice. What collective does that sound like? And what other collectives have you heard of that have this name that's associated with Mand or Mandan? It goes on to indicate the ceremony was performed annually and immediately preceding their harvest labors, the success of which it was designed to promote. This practice is said to be an anomaly among the North American nations. So here we have these Pawnee, who are, in terms of the name, they have an unusual name. We're going to get into this name, but they have an unusual name. They also have names that seem a bit Western European in terms of the Rakaras and the Arikaras. And then they have some distinctions related to skin color, perhaps here. Then we have this collective that has a different language, a different customs, a different spirituality that harkens back to the East. And they have a specific practice that is not practiced among the other indigenous collectives. And that practice of that annual custom also harkens back to the East. I'm not checking the time, but hopefully we're making good time related to our 10 minutes. If not, we will be very close to it. Okay, so these are the skull structures that this entity drew to depict these Pawnee skulls. Now, the person indicates that this was the first time that they had ever seen a Pawnee skull. And here you can see the measurements that the person is providing related to these skulls. And this is done for all of the skulls that the person is examining, but that's not the focus of our discussion. Now we're going to start off looking at some of the depictions of the Pawnee, and you can draw your own conclusions. Of course, what is noteworthy about a great deal of this is that we don't really see these people anymore. It's as if these people, in terms of the depictions that we have right here, it's as if they no longer exist. And so what has perhaps taken place is they have been relocated beyond the borders of America, or they have been amalgamated within the borders of America. It's unclear which situation is the most true. And it's possible that there's a mixture of dynamics going on. But all I know is we don't generally see people that look like this, exactly like this anymore, much. Okay, so this particular individual, the name is Sky Chief Tirawat Rasaru, or this also might be Tiravahut Rasaru, simply because of that interchange with the W and the V. And so it's unclear. This picture was created around 1867. Okay. And here we have another Pawnee Indian chief, and this person's name is Laru Chuck Alashar, meaning Sun Chief, or this entity was the Sun Chief. And this was also a Pawnee chief who died fighting the Lakota. Again, we don't generally see very many people that look just like this person. Actually, we see a few more people that look like this person than the previous depiction. Notice how you don't really see people that look like this particular individual anymore. There's a question of why. So now we're going to look at this Pawnee name. Pawnee is a name that was given to the collective of people. Now this is an interesting name for a number of reasons. First of all, Pawnee, according to the narrative, is another way, it's an anglicized way of saying Panis or Panis. Okay. And this word, Pawnee, means Indian slave or slaves of First Nation descent. And that's what Pawnee means. Now back to the root of our discussion. So we have the Pawnee, and the other word for Pawnee is Pawnees or Panis. Now the Pawnee is supposed to be an anglicized version of this Panis. And so you have Pawnee. And hopefully something is already jumping out at you with respect to that Pawnee name. Okay, so Panis or Pawnees means Indian slave. And so this name, Pawnee, that has been given to the collective of people is a way of saying Indian slave. It also means slaves of First Nation descent. So there are some people who believe that American Indians were not actually enslaved, but whoever these people were, they were enslaved. And this enslavement became a part of the identity, almost like calling someone a Slav, a Slavic. And so we've got Pawnee. Now, where might they get the word Pawnee from? So a group of people come into the Americas, they capture some people, enslave them, give them the name Pawnee. What does pawn mean in this anglicized version here? Pawn is another way of saying to give something or deposit something as security for money borrowed. Coming from the old French pan or pant, pledge, security. Consistent with all of that and enslaving someone, it also means booty or plunder, stolen goods. There's a claim that this is coming from the West Germanic panda, which is of an unknown origin. Okay, so what we've got is pawn that is consistent with Pawnee, what we see with respect to Pawnee. And so using someone as a security, as a financial resource. Now this is where research starts to join with other research. And so I'm just going to make this point here. There was already some research going on into this Panis name. Interestingly, what had already been noted was that this Panis or Pawnees is a name that has an Italian origin, but it's also related to the German because there are all of these transliterations and alternative forms of this Pawnees or Panis. And one form is really odd and interesting, but this Pawnees in the Italian is related to this occupation of a bread maker, a baker. And so you might have seen there's a restaurant called Panera, and so that's related to this. This, interestingly, is tied to another name that if you see it, you're not going to automatically, and generally speaking, you're not going to automatically make the connection. So there are some questions about this whole Pawnee, Panis, baked goods, and pawn shop dealings here going on with respect to all of these names. The related name in German is Pfizer, which also meant baker. And here you can see these very odd variations in terms of Pfizer. So you have Pfister, Pister, Pester, Pistorio. It goes on, and all of this synonymous with Panis or Panis or Panis. You see that it is coming from, according to this Upper German word of Pfister, which meant baker. Also referring to the monastery or court. This is going to wrap up our mini discussion. Hopefully we fell somewhere within the guidelines or we didn't get too far outside of that boundary. If you are identifying as Pawnee or Mandan, or this is part of your history, your collective, or you've been looking into this particular collective and you have some additional insights, please share. But as we have it right now, this is an indigenous collective that was basically, according to the narrative, marked for slavery. And because there was a race-based system of slavery, a phenotype-based system of slavery, it would be very easy to incorporate many of these individuals with the phenotypes that they are presenting with as enslaved people, because slave became synonymous with Negro, slave became synonymous with Indian piece, slave became synonymous with being dark, and so slave became synonymous with a number of phenotype related dynamics and words. And so therefore this particular collective of people became synonymous with that slave identity by being enslaved. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care.